I'm Eliane, and today let's talk about some tips for walking foot quilting. The first thing you want to make sure is that your walking foot is on your machine. I'm using a walking foot system that's integrated within my machine itself. I'm also using some cotton quilting thread so that I get the perfect quilting texture. First thing you want to start when you're doing any sort of quilting is you want to start with a really good baste. When you're basting your quilt, just make sure that you aren't pulling any of the fabrics. Think of a rubber band. When stretched, it's going to want to come back to neutral. So if you do any sort of pulling when you're basting, you're going to have your fabrics want to come back to neutral, which means you might end up with some puckers or some wrinkles, which will show up when you're quilting and cause you all sorts of issues. The next thing you want to make sure is that you have equipped yourself with a brand new needle. You should be changing your needle every 8 hours of quilting. So once you finish that quilt top, it's a good time to switch needles before we start quilting. Always make sure you're using the right type of needle as well, something that's going to go through all of these layers really nicely and evenly. Third thing that we want to do is make sure that we've got our quilt all marked out and ready to go, and we're almost ready to start quilting. The last thing that we want to check is our presser foot pressure. Your presser foot dictates how much pressure it puts onto your fabrics. So if you have thicker fabrics, you want less pressure. If you've ever tried to sew your quilt and you felt like you were really pushing those layers through the machine, it means that your presser foot pressure was too high and you need to lower it. You can do that simply by using your machine. Some machines have a knob on the top, some have it on the side. On my machine here, I have it right on the display. Mine's set to auto, but if I feel like I'm really pushing those layers and it's not doing its job, I can always use the plus and minus buttons to lower my presser. We're going to start by putting a nice line of stitching. Whoa, that's really fast. We're going to slow our machine down. If you have the ability to monitor how fast you stitch, slow it down so you're not so tempted to really speed through. You want that walking foot to be able to do its job, which means it needs to walk, and unfortunately, not run. You'll notice that I'm guiding the fabric through the machine. I'm not pushing it, I'm not pulling it, I'm just letting it do its thing. Another thing that you want to make sure is that you're always going the same direction in your quilting. Notice these lines of stitching here. Can you see the little V's? That's because on every line, I went a different direction. Even though you're not trying to pull on the fabric itself has a little bit of give, and it's going to pull a little bit naturally. If you alternate the way that you're stitching, starting on this side, maybe on the first row, and this side on the second row, you're going to end up with these little chevrons or V's. Maybe that's the look you're going for. I like to have it nice and smooth, and so I'm always going to start from the same direction and move all the way down. One way that you can make sure that your presser foot pressure is even is if you're going to do any sort of crosshatch quilting, where you're going to cross over any already existing lines of quilting. As I approach these lines here, my walking foot should walk right smoothly through them. I shouldn't get any sort of pucker right at that seam. If I do, that's an indication that I need to lower my presser foot pressure. Look how smoothly that line of stitching crossed all the other lines. Not a pucker in sight. And that's what we're looking for. And anytime that you're doing any sort of stitching in different directions, the same rule applies. I stitched on these lines all the way from the left to the right. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm always starting at the top because that's where I started the first time. And go all the way down. So my next line of stitching is going to start again in the same direction, going down. So you might have noticed I flipped my fabric over. Normally I'd always stitch from one direction, and this was my front. I showed you the back because that's where you could see the puckering a little bit better than you could on the front of my quilt top. The last tip is to always make sure that you're bunching your fabric in the harp of your machine, not rolling. When you roll it, it's going to add a lot of tension and pull. So those are some walking foot tips for you. I hope you get quilting.